The art of not caring does not mean that you stop caring about everyone and everything altogether. That is something ridiculous and practically impossible. This art is about redirecting your focus towards the things that really matter and that will make a positive difference in your life. To explain this concept, Mark Manson explains the story of a writer and novelist called Charles Bukowski. In all of his early life, Bukowski lived in misery and unhappiness. He engaged in all kinds of harmful activities and lived a valueless life. But then, after decades of such a lifestyle, Bukowski's fate suddenly changed and he sold millions of copies of his books. But the point is that his fate did not change because he suddenly decided to become a better person or made a decision to chase professional success. He became successful because he decided to be honest about himself, his filthy lifestyle, and all of his inherent flaws. He chose an attitude of acceptance which led him to material success. That is why on Bukowski's tombstone, the words "Don't try" are written on the epitaph. The lesson from Bukowski's story is that only thinking and focusing on becoming successful in anything is not enough. Success requires giving a damn about the things that will push you forward, and not about thinking about luxury cars or a fat bank account all the time. If there is something lacking in your life, or there is a problem hard to fix, obsessively thinking about it won't make the situation better. You see, most of the times, all you need to do is to let go of what is consuming your mind, focusing only on solutions, and if you don't find any, taking your attention away towards a more fuck-worthy thing. The other thing is that our mind is a sneaky machine that keeps spitting out all kinds of arbitrary problems in order to get our attention. And this is why the ability to not give a fuck is so key. There are three subtle keys to master this ability. Subtlety number 1. Not giving a fuck does not mean being indifferent. It means being comfortable with being different. Many people would like to think that not giving a fuck means being indifferent, but that's not true. Indifferent people are merely those people who have somehow managed to hide their fucks from other people. This is most of the time an indication that such a person used to give way too many fucks, and then they had to forcefully cut themselves out from the outside world in order to stop giving those fucks. There is nothing admirable about such an indifferent person. But what is admirable is the ability to be okay with being different. This means being able to accept your natural flaws instead of actively hiding them from others. This means accepting the fact that you are not supposed to be completely like everyone else, and that you can't be a life-changing presence for some without being a joke to others. That you can respectfully communicate your unique and different ways to others in order to make the world a better place. Subtlety number 2. To not give a fuck about adversity, you must first give a fuck about something more important than adversity. If you know what your values are, what you truly stand for, and what you truly want out of life, you won't have a problem dealing with adversity. If you want something bad enough, you won't give a damn about the obstacles and painful moments that you have to face. Subtlety number 3. Whether you realize it or not, you are always choosing what to give a fuck about. You have to be clear about what things you want and then only give a fuck about those things, while not giving a damn about other things. Conversely, if someone does not have something worthwhile to direct their fucks toward, they will give a fuck about everything all the time. If your goal is to be happy in life, then you're up for trouble. Because chasing happiness means that you're always doing things that make you feel good, even if they're harmful. Suppose you somehow get everything you ever wanted in life. Your every whim and desire has been fulfilled, and you're surrounded by all kinds of luxury and opulence. Of course, in the beginning, you would be very happy about it. But slowly, that happy high will come back to normal, and you will feel just as you're feeling right now. As more and more time passes, a point will come at which the very luxury that you have will be despised and hated by you. Now, why do you think that would be the case? The answer is simple. When you've achieved your dream life or target, you became very happy. Before achieving that goal or luxury, you always thought that once you will achieve that goal, everything will be head over heels for the rest of your life. But that's not how happiness works. After the initial burst of happiness and joy, you'll be back to normal. And if you further remain in that state for a long period of time, you'll become sad and unhappy. This is because there is no longer any meaning in your life. You see, happiness comes from solving problems and achieving goals and dreams. It's as simple as that. Now, if you deeply think about it, there can be no happiness without having problems. Problems give meaning to our life and existence, and happiness is simply the effect of solving problems. Keep in mind that the keyword here is solving. The disappointment panda. In the book, Mark Manson talks about his self-created superhero called the disappointment panda. This panda has a superpower of telling people ugly truths about their life that they need to hear. Disappointment panda would be the hero that none of us would want, but all of us would need. He would be the proverbial vegetables to our mental diet of junk food. He'd make our lives better despite making us feel worse. He'd make us stronger by tearing us down, brighten our future by showing us the darkness. Listening to him would be like watching a movie where the hero dies in the end. You love it even more despite making you feel horrible, because it feels real. Happiness comes from solving problems. Now, the basic gist behind the disappointment panda is the fact that we humans need pain as much as we need happiness or pleasure. If there was no pain, we would never be able to protect ourselves from danger or improve our present situation. This is why pain will never go away from your life. And guess what? That's perfectly fine. However, what we should be thinking about is how to have better problems and better forms of pain. Because after all of pain is not the same. There are better pains and problems, and there are worse pains and worse problems. Better problems are easily solvable, so acquiring happiness becomes an easy process. The worst problems, on the other hand, are problems that are extremely difficult to solve. Therefore, acquiring happiness becomes a difficult process and there is more unnecessary pain. Now, just like some people fuck things up by inherently chasing happiness, other people destroy themselves by avoiding problems. Avoiding problems means either denying them or hiding from them. This means there will be no meaningful happiness as well. Emotions are overrated. Emotions, whether they are positive or negative, are just feedback mechanisms that serve a function and help us live a better life. When you're feeling good emotions, that's a feedback that you've done something good and life promoting. When you feel bad emotions, that usually means that you've done something wrong and that it needs to be corrected. However, this does not mean that all good feelings come from good things and all bad feelings come from bad things. Some good feelings come from doing bad things, although we only see their detrimental effects later on. Similarly, some bad feelings come from doing good things, although we only see their beneficial effects later on. So, the conclusion is that we must learn how to think long term instead of chasing just highs of happiness or avoiding pain and problems. The talk that we must have with ourselves is about what struggles are we willing to undergo to achieve happiness. Because only chasing problems and struggles will bring us to real lasting happiness. The joy is in the climb itself. There was once a guy called Jimmy. Jimmy always had various business ventures going on. On any given day, if you asked him what he was doing, he'd rattle off the name of some firm he was consulting with, or he'd describe a promising medical app he was looking for angel investors to fund. Or he'd talk about some charity event he was supposed to be the keynote speaker for. Or how he had an idea for a more efficient type of gas pump that was going to make him billions. The guy was always rolling, always on, and if you gave him an inch of conversational daylight, he'd pulverize you about how world-spinning his work was, how brilliant his latest ideas were, and he'd name drop so much it felt like you were talking to a tabloid reporter. Jimmy was all positivity all the time. But the catch was that Jimmy was also a total deadbeat. He was all talk and no walk. Stoned a majority of time, and spending as much money in bars and fine restaurants as he did on his quote unquote business ideas, Jimmy was a professional leech, living off his family's hard won money by spending them as well as everybody else in the city on false ideas of future tech glory. And the most screwed up part was that Jimmy felt good about it. He had a delusional level of self confidence. People who called him out on his bogus business ideas were too ignorant and inexperienced to understand his genius. The reason for his delusional level of self confidence was his entitlement. He believed in all of his bullshit, despite the fact that in reality he had no real marketable skills except for his confidence. The problem with the self esteem movement is that it measures self esteem by how positively people felt about themselves. But a true and accurate measurement of one's self worth is how people feel about the negative aspects of themselves. If a person like Jimmy feels absolutely fucking great 99.9% of the time, despite his life falling apart around him, then how can that be a valid metric for a successful and happy life? Jimmy feels as though he deserves good things without actually earning them. He believes he should be able to be rich without actually working for it. He believes he should have an amazing lifestyle without actually sacrificing anything. People like Jimmy become so fixated on feeling good about themselves that they manage to delude themselves into believing that they're accomplishing great things even when they're not. They believe they're the brilliant presenter on stage when actually they're making a fool of themselves. They believe they're the successful startup founder when in fact they've never had a successful venture. Once people have developed the thought pattern to constantly construe what happens around them as self aggrandizing, it's extremely hard to break them out of it. But entitlement is a failed strategy. It's just another high, and it's not happiness. A person like Jimmy hides from his problems by making up imagined successes for himself at every turn, and because he can't face his problems, no matter how good he feels about himself, he is weak. Things fall apart. While all entitlements are not bad, most of them are really damaging. You see, if we have problems that are unsolvable, our unconscious figures that we're either uniquely special or uniquely defective in some way, that we're somehow unlike everyone else, and that the rules must be different for us. Put simply, we become entitled. There are two ways or mindsets in which such entitlement plays itself out. I'm awesome and the rest of you all suck, so I deserve special treatment. I suck and the rest of you are all awesome, so I deserve special treatment. Opposite mindset on the outside, but the same selfish core in the middle. In fact, you will often see entitled people flip back and forth between the two. Either they're on the top of the world or the world is on top of them, depending on the day of the week or how well they're doing with their particular addiction at that moment. The tyranny of exceptionalism. Most of us are pretty average at most of the things that we do. Even if you're exceptional at one thing, chances are you're average or below average at most other things. That's just the nature of life. To become truly great at something, you have to dedicate shit tons of time and energy to it. And because we all have limited time and energy, few of us ever become truly exceptional at more than one thing, if anything at all. But if you look at the media businesses, all you see is the extreme end of the bell curve. We're constantly bombarded with either the most exceptionally fantastic or the exceptionally horrible. Our minds therefore assume that there is something wrong with us, even if our lives are perfectly fine. By seeing the extreme ends of life, entitled people aspire to be the best, and if they somehow fail to be the best, they decide to become the worst. Because it has to be either one extreme or the other. This is the only way to ensure that they are always special and deserve attention. That is why accepting the bland and mundane truths of life is so important. Because when we do that, the burden to be exceptional gets lifted off our backs. And it then allows us to do what we are actually capable of doing. And even if we fail, we still accept it and realize that the things in life that truly matter, such as our friends, family, or even our most favorite book, are still with us. Hiro Onoda was a Japanese officer who fought in the World War II. Even after the World War II ended, Onoda kept fighting on the island of Philippines, unaware that the war was over. He refused to believe any letters or information about the end of the war, and so he kept fighting for almost 30 years. Not to mention the great burdens and sufferings of living in jungles and feeding off insects. But finally, when he returned to Japan after all these years, what he saw broke him from the inside. The new age consumerist capitalist culture in Japan and the lost old values made him depressed. He became unhappy and finally left Japan. Now, the irony is that Onoda was better off in the jungle than he was in his comfortable home in Japan, even though the jungle would have been a source of troubles and sufferings. But at least there his suffering meant something. He had hopes of winning that made all the suffering not only bearable but quite enjoyable. That is the value of meaningful suffering. The self-awareness onion. Self-awareness is like an onion. There are multiple layers to it, and the more you peel them back, the more likely you're going to start crying at inappropriate times. The first layer of your self-awareness onion is identifying which emotions you are feeling. For example, being able to differentiate between feeling sad or feeling angry. It is the simplest form of self-awareness. The second layer of the self-awareness onion is being able to ask why you're feeling the emotion you're feeling. These why questions are difficult and often take months or even years to answer consistently and accurately. Most people need to go to some sort of therapist just to hear these questions asked for the first time. Such questions are important because they illuminate what we consider success or failure. This layer of questioning helps us understand the root cause of the emotions that overwhelm us. Once we understand that root cause, we can ideally do something to change it. The third layer of this onion is the most difficult one. It is extremely hard to figure out, and for many people, this process can take a whole lifetime. This layer of self-awareness onion is your personal values. Why do you consider this a success? Why do you consider this thing a failure? It's the most important because our values determine the nature of our problems, and the nature of our problems determines the quality of our lives. Values underlie everything we are and do. If what we value is unhelpful, if what we consider success or failure is poorly chosen, then everything based upon those values, the thoughts, the emotions, the day-to-day feelings, will all be out of whack. Everything we think and feel about a situation ultimately comes back to how valuable we perceive it to be. Defining good and bad values. Good values are reality-based, socially constructive, and immediate and controllable. Bad values are superstitious, socially destructive, and not immediate or controllable. Some examples of good, healthy values are honesty, innovation, vulnerability, standing up for oneself, standing up for others, self-respect, curiosity, charity, humility, creativity. Some examples of bad and unhealthy values are dominance through manipulation or violence, feeling good all the time, always being the center of attention, not being alone, being liked by everybody, being rich for the sake of being rich, sacrificing small animals to the pagan gods. You'll notice that good, healthy values are achieved internally. Something like creativity or humility can be experienced right now. You simply have to orient your mind in a certain way to experience it. These values are immediate and controllable, and engage you with the world as it is rather than how you wish it were. We're all born choosers, even those who were born as slaves. I know this may sound ridiculous, but it's true. And let me tell you another unpleasant truth. Many people today are worse slaves than the slaves of the old days of slavery. Because the slaves of today are those who give up on their greatest power, which is the power of personal responsibility and individual sovereignty. This results in a victim mentality, but I have many other different names for it. Now, as I said before, we are always choosing, and it is the things we choose to do in our lives that make us who we are. When we give a damn about something, we are choosing that thing out of thousands of other things that exist in our personal space. If someone is choosing to complain and brood over a problem, that's a choice made by that person out of, say, at least 100 choices, and the other 99 choices could be different ways of solving the problem. And you see, there is a reason for making that choice. After all, it was the easiest one, and it lifted up the pain, even if temporarily. The responsibility fault fallacy. With great power comes great responsibility. This is a quote from Uncle Ben. No, not my uncle, but Spider Man's Uncle Ben. He said it right before he died, when he got shot in the movie. Let's reverse the order of this fantastic combination. With great responsibility comes great power. The more we choose to accept responsibility in our lives, the more power we will exercise over our lives. Accepting responsibility for our problems is thus the first step to solving them. I know it's kind of obvious, but there's a reason people miss out on this one. You see, a lot of people hesitate to take responsibility for their problems because deep down they believe that to be responsible for your problems is to also be at fault for your problems. But this is not an accurate judgment. Responsibility and fault often appear together in our culture, but they're not the same thing. If I hit you with my car, I am both at fault and likely legally responsible to compensate you in some way. Even if hitting you with my car was an accident, I am still responsible. This is the way fault works in our society. But there are also problems that we aren't at fault for, yet we are still responsible for them. For example, if you woke up one day and there was a newborn baby on your doorstep, it would not be your fault that the baby had been put there, but the baby would now be your responsibility. You would have to choose what to do, and whatever you ended up choosing, like keeping it, getting rid of it, or ignoring it, there would be problems associated with your choice, and you would be responsible for those as well. You are already choosing in every moment of every day what to give a damn about. So, change is as simple as choosing to give a damn about something else. It really is that simple. But it's just not easy. It's not easy because you're going to feel like a loser, a fraud, a dumbass at first. You're going to be nervous, you're going to freak out, you may get pissed off at your wife or your friends or your father in the process. These are all side effects of changing your values. But they are inevitable. It's simple but really, really hard. Let's look at some of these side effects. Uncertainty. I can guarantee that you will feel it. Should I really give this up? Is this the right thing to do? Giving up a value you've depended on for years is going to feel disorienting, as if you don't really know right from wrong anymore. This is hard, but it's normal. Next, you'll feel like a failure. You've spent half your life measuring yourself by that old value, so when you change your priorities and your metrics and stop behaving in the same way, you'll fail to meet that old, trusted metric and thus immediately feel like some sort of fraud or nobody. This is also normal and also uncomfortable. And certainly, you will weather rejections. Many of the relationships in your life were built around the values you've been keeping. So, the moment you change those values, which means that the moment you decide that studying is more important than partying, that getting married and having a family is more important than rampant sex, that working a job you believe in is more important than money, your turnaround will reverberate out through your relationships, and many of them will blow up in your face. This too is normal, and this too will be uncomfortable. These are necessary, though painful, side effects of choosing to place your focus elsewhere, in a place far more important and more worthy of your energies. As you reassess your values, you will be met with internal and external resistance along the way. More than anything, you will feel uncertain and you'll wonder if what you're doing is wrong. But in the end, it all becomes a good thing. As children, we all used to believe in things which were not only untrue, but also absurd and laughable. As a kid, I used to believe that I was brought down on earth, wrapped up in white silk clothing, carried by white heavenly birds who came to see my mother. And I believed it with such certainty that even later I was unwilling to entertain anyone else telling me that I was wrong. The idea seemed so real and so stimulating that I was unwilling to let go of it and accept a very different reality. Most importantly, I had been holding on to it for way too long. As I kept getting older, with every passing year, the list of such absurd things kept growing longer and longer, and I was wrong about a whole lot of things. Sure, I was also right about some things, but that's for another discussion. Every step of the way, I was wrong about everything throughout my life. I've been flat out wrong about myself, others, society, culture, the world, the universe, everything. And I hope that will continue to be the case for the rest of my life. There's a famous Michael Jordan quote about him failing over and over and over again, and that's why he succeeded. And so I always become happy when I'm wrong about something over and over and over again, because that's when my life improves. Growth is an endlessly iterative process. When we learn something new, we don't go from wrong to right, but rather we go from wrong to slightly less wrong. And when we learn something additional, we go from slightly less wrong to slightly less wrong than that, and then to even less wrong than that, and so on. We are always in the process of approaching truth and perfection without actually ever reaching truth or perfection. You see, there is no perfect ideology. There is just something that works at a given time and in a given manner, and only for a given person or a specific kind of people. But at some different time or in a different situation, that same ideology will not work. Heck, it can also backfire and make things worse. Architects of our own beliefs. Once some psychologists conducted an experiment on a group of people by closing them in a room with many light sources and different buttons along with them. The goal was to make the light flash on. And so people started to smash the buttons using different made-up combinations. At certain points, the light would flash, and seeing so, they would try to recall what they had done previously. By the end of the experiment, when researchers came into the room, they saw a weird spectacle. A person was standing on the chair, some other person was standing on one leg, and another one was trying to remember a long sequence of buttons pressed in a specific amount of time while facing a certain direction. But the funniest part of the experiment was that the points were random. The point of the experiment is to show how quickly the human mind is capable of coming up with and believing in a bunch of BS that isn't real. And whereas we can be accurate about things sometimes, but mostly we're deluding ourselves. This, however, does not mean that we should stop using our heads altogether. But what we should understand is that most of the times when we come up with theories, there is a high probability that most of them will be wrong. And so we should move forward with care and consideration. Buddhism argues that your idea of who you are is an arbitrary mental construction, and that you should let go of the idea that you exist at all, that the arbitrary metrics by which you define yourself actually trap you, and thus you're better off letting them go. Well, there are some psychological benefits to this approach to life. When we let go of the stories we tell about ourselves to ourselves, we free ourselves up to actually act and grow, despite failures or setbacks. When someone admits to herself that she is not good at relationships, then she is suddenly free to act and end her bad marriage. She has no identity to protect by staying in a miserable, crappy marriage just to prove something to herself. How to be less certain of yourself. In order to avoid the dangers of uncertainty, you should start questioning your beliefs and ideas. You won't be very wrong every single time. But when you'll be right, your improvement will skyrocket. Develop the habit of asking the following questions. Number 1. What if I'm wrong? It's worth remembering that for any change to happen in your life, you must be wrong about something. If you're sitting there miserable day after day, then that means you're already wrong about something major in your life. And until you are able to question yourself to find it, nothing will change. Number 2. What would it mean if I were wrong? Aristotle wrote, "It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it." Being able to look at and evaluate different values without necessarily adopting them is perhaps the central skill required in changing one's own life in a meaningful way. Number 3. Would being wrong create a better or a worse problem than my current problem, for both myself and others? The goal here is to look at which problem is better. If the result of your current belief being wrong is you having better and easily solvable problems, then it is better to either modify or get rid of that belief. It is not easy to let go of values and certainties that we have held on to for a long time. But if such values are making your life worse, it is better to either drop them or modify them to have better and easily solvable problems. Fear of failing at something is a natural emotion that exists in everybody. But for most people, it becomes the greatest obstacle in achieving their goals, having the kind of relationships they want, and creating the lifestyle that they want. What is actually happening with such people is that they are not playing to win, but in fact, they are playing not to lose. The desire for success, gains, or a better relationship isn't strong enough to override the naturally existing fear of failure. Now, why is that the case? The reason of such a lack of desire is not necessarily a lack of energy, a lack of incentive, or being comfortable. It is the lack of focus, focused attention towards specific core values, and a lack of emotional intelligence. This means that a person is afraid to start a business because he also somewhat likes the comfort of a nice and cozy 9 to 5 job, despite him wanting to live wealthy and free. It can also mean that a person is afraid of committing to someone because he's unwilling to give up his freedom even a little bit, despite the fact that he craves a real connection and vulnerability. If you pay close attention, you will see that life is full of paradoxes. You can't have it all at the same time. And so that's why you must be willing to make a conscious choice of choosing about what to embrace and what to leave behind, or at least leaving for another time. To become successful at anything, you have to learn how to value only that thing at that given moment. This can be a combination of intense focus and emotional intelligence, or it can also be a combination of intense focus and environmental influence. It depends on you. But no matter what kind of person you are, gaining such clarity is always possible. The do something principle. The motivation to overcome your fear of failure can only come from taking the first step towards what you're afraid of. Same goes for getting out of your comfort zone. The basic formula is this: action, inspiration, motivation, or aim. First, you take some form of action towards the desired object. That first step creates a momentum that breeds inspiration, and that inspiration motivates you further to take action. On the other hand, relying on motivation alone will not be an effective strategy, especially for the long run, because it is not under your control, whereas the ability to take action definitely is. Being a yes man is very easy. You don't have to choose anything. You don't have to resist anything. You don't even have to wait for anything. But there is a heavy price you pay for all of this. And this paradoxical price is your absolute freedom. Now, you might think, how would that be possible? Doesn't being a yes man or being a totally open person a road to freedom and options? Well, the thing is, the world is very complex. And with the backwards law, the more freedom you pursue, the more you become a slave to that freedom. If you fail to define the things that are important to you, you will find yourself saying yes to everything all the time. And the world will enslave you, and you will lose everything you have and all of your value. Freedom grants the opportunity for greater meaning, But by itself, there is nothing necessarily meaningful about it. Ultimately, the only way to achieve meaning and a sense of importance in one's life is through a rejection of alternatives and a narrowing of freedom. This means that you will have to say no to most things that come your way and say yes to only those things that are important to you, especially in the long run. Rejection makes your life better. As an extension of your positivity consumer culture, many of us have been quote unquote indoctrinated with the belief that we should try to be as inherently accepting and affirmative as possible. To open ourselves up to opportunities, be accepting, say yes to everything and everyone, and so on. But we also need to reject something. Otherwise, we stand for nothing. If nothing is better or more desirable than anything else, then we are empty and our life is meaningless. We are without values and therefore live our life without any purpose. The avoidance of both giving and receiving rejection is often sold to us as a way to make ourselves feel better. But avoiding rejection gives us short-term pleasure by making us rudderless and directionless in the long term. Rejection is an important and crucial life skill. Nobody wants to be stuck in a relationship that isn't making them happy. Nobody wants to be stuck in a business doing work they hate and don't believe in. Nobody wants to feel that they can't say what they really mean. Yet people choose these things all the time. Boundaries. While having absolutely rigid, uncompromising boundaries might make life boring and leave no room for intimacy or vulnerability, having no boundaries at all will do much worse. And even having weaker boundaries means that you are either trying to save other people all the time or you're playing the victim all the time. The concept of personal boundaries is extremely important to understand in close interpersonal relationships, and especially in intimate relationships. A toxic relationship is the one in which the partners are codependent on each other. They both take responsibility for solving each other's problems all the time, or conversely, expect the other person to solve their problems all the time. Here are a few examples of poor boundaries. You can't go out with your friends without me. You know how jealous I get. You have to stay at home with me. My coworkers are idiots. They always make me late to meetings because I have to tell them how to do their jobs. I can't believe you made me feel so stupid in front of my own sister. Never disagree with me in front of her again. I'd love to take that job, but my mother would never forgive me for moving so far away. In each scenario, the person is either taking responsibility for problems or emotions that are not theirs, or demanding that someone else take responsibility for their problems and emotions. In a healthy relationship, both partners take responsibility for their own problems and values first. Only then true intimacy and lasting attraction can be experienced. How to build trust. Trust is a valuable asset. It takes time and effort to build, and it is easy to lose it. But without saying no, trust cannot be built, because we cannot know what the values of such a person are. You see, what you really are is defined by the things you reject in life. And if you reject nothing in life, then you probably don't have any values. For a relationship to be healthy, both people must be willing and able to both say no and hear no. Without that negation, without that occasional rejection, boundaries break down and one person's problems and values come to dominate the others. Conflict is not only normal then, but it is absolutely necessary for the maintenance of a healthy relationship. Let's face it, we're all gonna die one day, and there is no point in denying this fact. In the face of death, nothing matters except one thing, and that is your legacy. If you're giving way too many fucks about loose, trivial, and meaningless things, you will never be able to focus on creating a legacy. You will waste your life without even realizing that you're wasting your life. Therefore, you must have clear values, and to do that, you will have to begin with the end in mind, which means you have to keep your death in mind. This is precisely what the art of not giving a fuck is all about.